The moon hung like a silver dollar over the jagged peaks of the Superstition Mountains, casting long shadows across the Arizona territory. Jack Harmon slumped in his saddle, his weathered face half hidden beneath the brim of his dusty Stetson. A nearly empty bottle of whiskey dangled from his calloused fingers as his horse, a sturdy Palomino named Chance, picked its way along the rocky trail with the practiced ease of an animal that had grown accustomed to guiding its inebriated master home. At 45, Jack wore his years like the scars on his knuckles, each one earned the hard way in a life that had seen too much bloodshed and heartache. The war between the states had taken his youth, the frontier had claimed his family, and whiskey was steadily consuming what remained of his soul. Tonight, like most nights over the past 3 years, he had drowned his demons at the Rusty Nail Saloon in the small settlement of Redemption, a dusty collection of wooden buildings that barely qualified as a town. His small ranch lay another hour's ride into the foothills, a lonely place that felt more like a penance than a home. The night air carried a chill that even the whiskey couldn't completely chase away. Jack took another swig from the bottle, grimacing as the cheap liquor burned down his throat. He had been a respected scout for the army once, before the drink got hold of him. Now he scraped by with odd jobs and the meager profits from his small cattle operation. The locals treated him with a mixture of pity and caution, a fallen man who still commanded respect for the skills and knowledge he possessed, even in his diminished state. His reputation as a tracker and frontiersman remained intact, even if his dignity did not. As Chance navigated a particularly treacherous stretch of trail, Jack's unfocused gaze drifted toward the starlit horizon. Something didn't feel right. Despite his intoxication, instincts honed by years of survival on the frontier prickled at the back of his neck. He straightened slightly in the saddle, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt .45 holstered at his hip. The weapon was the one thing he always kept in pristine condition, even when he could barely stand upright. A sound carried on the night breeze, high-pitched and frantic, stopped him cold. Jack cocked his head, trying to filter the noise through his whiskey-addled brain. It came again, unmistakable this time, the yipping and snarling of coyotes on a hunt, but mixed with something else. Something that made Jack's blood run cold despite his alcoholic haze. A cry, a human cry, high and desperate. Without conscious thought, Jack stuffed the whiskey bottle into his saddlebag and spurred Chance forward, heading toward the commotion. The Palomino responded instantly, seeming to sense the urgency in his master's sudden sobriety. They crested a small rise, and in the silver moonlight below, Jack saw them, a pack of 5 coyotes, circling and darting forward in turns towards something small and dark on the ground beneath a twisted juniper tree. The night air carried another cry, and Jack realized with sudden, horrifying clarity that it was the sound of a baby. "Yeah!" he shouted, drawing his revolver and firing a shot into the air as Chance thundered down the slope. The coyotes scattered momentarily, startled by the gunshot and the charging horse. But they didn't flee far. Jack leapt from the saddle before Chance had fully stopped, stumbling as he hit the ground, but managing to keep his feet under him. He fired another shot, closer to the pack this time, and the predators retreated a bit further. Jack advanced toward the bundle on the ground, his heart hammering in his chest. As he drew closer, he saw it clearly, a small infant no more than a few months old, wrapped in a colorful woven blanket that he recognized as Navajo work. The baby wailed in terror, tiny fists flailing against the cool night air. Jack holstered his gun and scooped up the child with surprisingly gentle hands, cradling it against his chest as he backed toward his horse, keeping his eyes on the coyotes that paced at the edge of the clearing, still hungry, still waiting. "Where the hell did you come from, little one?" Jack muttered, his voice rough from whiskey and disuse. The baby's cries quieted somewhat at the sound of a human voice and the warmth of being held. Jack's bleary eyes scanned the surrounding area, searching for any sign of the child's parents. There was no campfire, no wagon, no horse, nothing to indicate how this infant had come to be abandoned in Coyote territory. The only sign of human presence was a small trail of blood that led from the base of the juniper tree and disappeared into the darkness of the brush. With the baby secure in one arm, Jack drew his gun again and fired a third shot at the lingering coyotes. This time, they scattered into the night, their yipping calls fading into the distance. Jack knew they might return, and he couldn't stay here with the child. He needed to find help, or at least shelter for the night. His ranch was still too far, and he didn't trust himself to make it there safely with an infant in his current state. Jack's alcohol-fogged mind struggled to make sense of his options. Then he remembered there was a Navajo encampment not far from here, perhaps half an hour's ride to the north. He had traded with them occasionally in the past, exchanging supplies for their intricate blankets and silverwork. If the child was Navajo, as the blanket suggested, they would know what to do. And even if the baby belonged to another tribe, the Navajo would surely take better care of it than a drunk ex-scout living alone in the wilderness. Decision made, Jack carefully mounted Chance, adjusting the small bundle against his chest. The baby had quieted now, seemingly soothed by the steady beat of his heart. Jack felt a strange tightness in his throat as he looked down at the tiny face, now peaceful in sleep. It had been a long time since he had held anything so innocent, so trusting. For the first time in years, Jack felt the heavy fog of his self-pity lift, replaced by a fierce, protective clarity. "Come on, Chance," he murmured to his horse, turning north. "Let's find this little one's people." The Palomino seemed to understand, picking up a steady, smooth pace that wouldn't jostle the sleeping infant. As they rode, Jack found himself growing increasingly sober, the responsibility of the small life in his arms burning away the whiskey haze more effectively than black coffee or cold water ever could. He kept his eyes sharp, scanning the darkness for any signs of danger or any clue to the baby's origins. The night remained quiet except for the rhythmic sound of Chance's hooves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Jack wondered about the blood trail he had seen. Had the mother been attacked? Was she out there somewhere, injured or worse? The thought troubled him deeply. Despite his fall from grace, Jack had never been able to ignore someone in need. It was both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness in a land that often rewarded selfishness and cruelty. The journey to the Navajo camp seemed to take both an eternity and no time at all. Jack's mind drifted between hyper-awareness of his surroundings and a strange, dreamlike state where memories of his own long-dead family surfaced like ghosts. He had been married once before the war. Sarah, with her laughing eyes and gentle hands, they had been expecting their first child when the influenza took her and their unborn baby in the winter of '58. The grief had driven him to enlist when the war broke out, seeking death on distant battlefields. Instead, he had found only more pain and a talent for survival that sometimes felt like a curse rather than a blessing. The baby stirred against his chest, making small sounds that pulled Jack back to the present. Ahead, through a stand of juniper and pine, he could make out the faint glow of campfires. The Navajo encampment, relief flooded through him, followed immediately by uncertainty. How would they receive him? A white man known for his drinking, arriving in the middle of the night with a native child. Jack approached the camp slowly, knowing better than to ride in unannounced. When he reached the edge of the firelight, he stopped and called out in the few words of Navajo he knew, announcing his presence and his peaceful intentions. Several figures emerged from the shadows, men with wary expressions and weapons held ready. Jack remained still, one hand raised in greeting, the other supporting the bundle against his chest. He spoke again, this time in English, hoping someone would understand. "I found a child, a baby, being attacked by coyotes. The blanket is Navajo work. I hoped you might help." There was a moment of tense silence. Then an older man stepped forward, his deeply lined face impassive in the flickering firelight. He spoke rapid Navajo to the others, then addressed Jack in heavily accented English. "You bring child here." Why? Jack struggled to find the right words, aware that his usual gruff manner wouldn't serve him well here. I couldn't leave it to die, he said simply, then added, I found blood nearby, and the mother may be hurt. This information caused a stir among the Navajo men. The elder spoke again to his companions, and two young men immediately mounted horses and rode out into the darkness, presumably to search for the injured woman. The elder then gestured for Jack to dismount and approach. Show, child, he commanded. With careful movements, Jack slid from the saddle, keeping the baby secure against him. He stepped into the circle of firelight and gently pulled back the edge of the blanket, revealing the sleeping infant's face. The elder leaned close, examining the child, then looked sharply at Jack. This not Navajo child? This Apache? Blanket Navajo child Apache? The information hit Jack like a physical blow. Apache. The implications were immediately clear and deeply troubling. Relations between white settlers and the Apache were strained at best, openly hostile at worst. The U.S. Army had been engaged in an escalating series of conflicts with various Apache bands for years. If this child belonged to the Apache, how had it come to be wrapped in a Navajo blanket and abandoned in the wilderness? Had there been a raid, an attack? Was the blood he had seen the result of violence between tribes or between natives and whites? The elder seemed to read the questions in Jack's face. You good man to bring child, he said, his expression softening slightly. But dangerous thing you do. Apache lose child. Apache very angry. Maybe think Navajo take child. Maybe think white man take child. Much trouble. Jack hadn't considered this angle, and it sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the night air. He had acted on instinct, thinking only of saving an innocent life. Now he realized he might have stepped into a situation far more complex and potentially deadly than he had imagined. The elder gestured toward a large wickiup near the center of the camp. Come, woman there, help with child. Jack followed, still cradling the baby, acutely aware of the curious and suspicious gazes that followed him. The elder held aside the covering at the entrance of the dwelling, revealing a warm, fire-lit interior where several women sat working on various crafts. They looked up in surprise at the sight of a white man entering their space. The elder spoke rapidly in Navajo, and one of the younger women rose immediately, approaching Jack with her arms outstretched for the child. Jack hesitated, feeling an unexpected reluctance to part with the baby. The woman's eyes met his, and he saw kindness there, but also determination. With a small nod, he carefully transferred the bundled infant to her capable hands. The baby stirred, but didn't wake, seemingly content in its new guardian's arms. The woman carried the child to the fire, unwrapping the blanket to check for injuries. Jack watched, standing awkwardly by the entrance, unsure of his place now that his immediate task was complete. The elder touched his arm, guiding him back outside. You stay tonight, he said, and it wasn't a request. Dawn come. We decide what to do. Jack nodded, understanding that he was as much a guest as a prisoner. The Navajo would not harm him. He had saved a child after all. But neither would they let him leave until they had determined the safest course of action for everyone involved. The night deepened as Jack sat by one of the smaller fires at the edge of the camp, a cup of strong, bitter coffee replacing his usual whiskey. His horse had been unsaddled and tended to, his weapons respectfully but firmly taken for safekeeping. The two riders who had gone to search for the baby's mother returned just before midnight, their expressions grim. They spoke at length with the elder, too far away and too quiet for Jack to hear, but their body language told him all he needed to know. They had found something, and it wasn't good. Jack sipped his coffee and waited, knowing that he would be told what he needed to know when the time was right. Eventually, the elder approached and sat heavily beside him. Woman dead, he said without preamble. Apache woman, shot in back. Navajo blanket stolen from our people in raid last moon. Woman try to run with baby. Hide baby when she knows she die. The elder's words painted a vivid and heartbreaking picture. A mother's desperate attempt to save her child, using her last strength to hide the infant from whoever was pursuing her. It was a story Jack had heard too many times in his years on the frontier, though usually from the other side. White settlers killed by native raiders, not natives killed by whites. But the fundamental tragedy was always the same. Innocent lives destroyed by the cycle of violence that seemed endless in these contested lands. "Who shot her?" Jack asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The elder's dark eyes reflected the firelight as he stared into the flames. "White men, hunters, 3, maybe 4. Tracks say they follow woman long way, hunt her like deer." Jack felt sick. He had no illusions about the brutality that existed on the frontier, had seen it firsthand during his scouting days, but the deliberate hunting of a woman with a baby struck him as a particular kind of evil. "The child," Jack said after a long silence. "What will happen to it?" The elder sighed, a sound of deep weariness. "Apache camp, 3 days, ride south. We send message when sunrise. Tell what happened. They come for child." Jack nodded slowly. It was the right thing to do, of course. The child belonged with its own people. But something troubled him still. The men who killed the mother. They might still be out there, might come looking for the baby. The elder gave him a sharp look. "You know these men?" Jack shook his head. "No, but I know their kind." And he did. During his time as a scout, he had encountered men who viewed all natives as vermin to be exterminated, who collected scalps for bounties and boasted of their kills in saloons. Men who would think nothing of shooting a fleeing woman in the back, and who might well return to make sure no witnesses remained. "We protect child," the elder said firmly. "And you. Sleep now. Morning bring counsel." With that, the old man rose and left Jack alone with his thoughts and the dying fire. Sleep seemed impossible with the weight of the night's events pressing on him, but exhaustion and the remnants of whiskey in his system eventually pulled him into a restless slumber beside the embers. Jack's dreams were a chaotic swirl of images. Sarah's face twisted in pain as the fever took her, battlefields strewn with the bodies of young men in blue and grey, a desperate Apache woman running through moonlit trees with a baby clutched to her breast, coyotes circling, always circling. He woke several times during the night, disoriented and reaching for his gun, only to remember where he was and why. Each time, he would stare up at the vast expanse of stars overhead, trying to find some meaning in the random patterns of light, some answer to questions he couldn't fully articulate. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when Jack was awakened by a gentle hand on his shoulder. He opened his eyes to find a young Navajo woman kneeling beside him, her dark hair framing a face both beautiful and solemn. It took him a moment to recognize her as the same woman who had taken the baby from his arms the night before. She spoke softly in English, her voice melodic despite the foreign tongue. "Baby awake, ask for you." Jack blinked in confusion. "Asks for me? The baby can't talk." The woman's lips curved in a small smile. "Not with words, with spirit. Baby know who save him. Come." Still trying to process her meaning, Jack rose stiffly and followed her through the camp, which was already stirring with early morning activity. They entered the same wickiup as the night before, where now only one older woman sat tending the fire. In a small cradle fashioned from a basket, the infant lay awake, tiny hands reaching toward the hide ceiling. "I watch him all night," the young woman explained as they approached the makeshift crib. "He good baby, strong spirit." When the infant caught sight of Jack, something remarkable happened. The tiny face, which had been screwed up in what looked like the beginning of a cry, suddenly relaxed, and the little hands reached out toward him instead. The young woman smiled more broadly now. "See? He know you." Jack stood frozen, overwhelmed by the child's apparent recognition. How could a baby remember him after such a brief encounter? And yet, there was no denying the infant's reaction. Almost against his will, Jack found himself reaching down to lift the child. The baby immediately quieted. small fingers curling around one of Jack's rough digits with surprising strength. "What's his name?" Jack asked, his voice unusually soft. The woman shook her head. "No name. Apache custom. Mother tell name to father. Father tell tribe. Mother dead before she say." Jack looked down at the small face, now peaceful and trusting in his arms. A child without a name, without parents, caught between worlds that were constantly at war with each other. In that moment, something shifted deep within Jack Harmon's soul, some long-dormant part of himself stirring to life again. He had been running from responsibility, from connection, from anything that might lead to more pain. But standing here, holding this orphaned child who had reached for him with such trust, he felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to crumble. The young woman watched him with knowing eyes. "My name Nijoni," she said suddenly. She said, "Mean beautiful," in Navajo language. Jack nodded, still captivated by the baby's grip on his finger. "I'm Jack Harmon." Nijoni stepped closer, gently touching the baby's cheek. "Jack save baby from coyotes. Baby save Jack from darkness. This how Great Spirit work." Before Jack could respond to her enigmatic words, the hide covering at the entrance was pushed aside, and the elder from the night before entered, followed by several other men who appeared to be tribal leaders. Their expressions were grave, and Jack instinctively held the baby closer. The elder spoke, his voice carrying the weight of a formal announcement. "Council meet at sunrise, decide what must be done." He gestured to the infant in Jack's arms. "Child Apache must return to Apache people, but journey dangerous. White hunters still out there. Our young men see their camp as they search for mother. 4 men with many guns." The elder's eyes fixed on Jack. "You know Frontier, you good tracker, you saved child once. We ask you take child to Apache camp, safer with white man who look like hunter. No one suspect." The request struck Jack like a thunderbolt. They wanted him to transport an Apache baby across 3 days of dangerous territory, possibly pursued by men who had already killed once and would not hesitate to kill again. It was a suicide mission at worst, a fool's errand at best, and yet looking down at the innocent face of the child in his arms, Jack knew he could not refuse. This child had saved him as surely as he had saved it, pulling him from the slow suicide of whiskey and self-pity that had consumed him for years. Nijoni stepped forward, addressing the elders in rapid Navajo. A heated discussion followed, with much gesturing and several glances in Jack's direction. Finally, the elder raised his hand for silence, then turned to Jack. "Nijoni say she go too. She care for baby on journey. She know Apache ways. Speak little Apache language. Help make peace when we find tribe." Jack looked at Nijoni in surprise. The young woman met his gaze steadily, her chin raised in determination. There was something in her eyes that spoke of her own private pain, her own reasons for volunteering for such a dangerous mission. Jack turned back to the elder. "Won't her family object?" The elder's weathered face remained impassive. "Nijoni have no family now. Husband die in fight with white soldiers. Baby die of fever. She alone." The simple words carried the weight of immense tragedy, explaining both Nijoni's skill with the orphaned infant and the shadow of sorrow that Jack had glimpsed behind her eyes. He understood loss in a way few others could. Perhaps that shared understanding was why the baby had connected them both, 2 broken souls brought together by an orphaned child. "When do we leave?" Jack asked, his decision made. The elder nodded, apparently unsurprised by his acceptance. "Today, when sun high, we give food, water, extra horse for woman. You take your weapons, rifle good for hunting, not good for baby to hear, but may need." He hesitated, then added, "White hunters not know you have baby. They think baby with mother when they kill her. Maybe they not look for baby at all. Maybe just hide from army after what they do." It was a small hope, but Jack clung to it. If the killers believed the child had died with its mother, or if they were more concerned with escaping justice than tying up loose ends, the journey might be less dangerous than feared. Still, he would prepare for the worst and hope for the best, the only sensible approach to survival on the frontier. The next few hours passed in a flurry of preparation. Jack's weapons were returned to him, along with Chance, who had been well fed and groomed. Supplies were packed: dried meat, corn cakes, water skins, and extra blankets. A sturdy pinto mare was provided for Nijoni, along with a cleverly designed carrier that would allow her to secure the baby against her chest while riding. The Navajo women fussed over the infant, bathing him and wrapping him in fresh cloths. Jack cleaned his colt thoroughly and checked his Winchester repeating rifle, ensuring both were in perfect working order. He studied a rough map drawn by one of the Navajo men, memorizing the landmarks that would guide them to the Apache encampment. All the while, he found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Nijoni, who moved with quiet efficiency, her face serene despite the danger that lay ahead. As the sun reached its zenith, they prepared to depart. The entire camp gathered to see them off, solemn faces betraying their concern for the mission. The baby had been fed and was sleeping peacefully in the carrier secured to Nijoni's chest. Jack mounted Chance, feeling clearer-headed than he had in years. The whiskey craving still gnawed at him, but it was distant now, overshadowed by the responsibility he had accepted. The elder approached, placing a hand on Jack's stirrup. "Great Spirit watch over you," he said simply. Jack nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Then his eyes met Nijoni's, and something passed between them. An understanding, a commitment to see this through together. With a final nod to the assembled Navajo, Jack turned Chance southward, and their journey began. Behind them, the camp quickly disappeared into the rugged landscape, leaving them alone with their mission and the sleeping child, who had changed both their lives in a single night. The first day of travel passed without incident, though tension rode with them like a third companion. Jack led the way, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, every sense alert for signs of danger. Nijoni followed on the pinto mare, humming softly to the baby when he fussed, and speaking to Jack in her limited but improving English when the child slept. They learned each other's stories in fragments, sharing pieces of their pasts during brief rest stops or over a small fire as dusk fell. Jack told her about Sarah, about the war, about his years as a scout and his subsequent descent into drink. Nijoni spoke of her childhood in a traditional Navajo family, her arranged marriage at 16 to a kind man 20 years her senior, the joy of their son's birth, and the devastating loss of both husband and child within a single moon cycle. They were tales of grief, yet in the telling, both found a measure of healing they hadn't expected. "My people say that when Great Spirit take loved ones, he leave whole in heart," Nijoni said, as they sat beside their small campfire that first night. The baby sleeping peacefully between them. Whole, never closed completely, but new love can come, fill empty space with different shape. She gazed down at the sleeping infant, her expression soft in the firelight. "This child not replace my son, but giving love to him, heal something in me." Jack nodded, understanding completely. The orphaned Apache baby could never replace the child he and Sarah had lost before it was born, but saving him had awakened something long dormant in Jack's soul, a capacity for care, for connection, for purpose beyond mere survival. As the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead, Jack took the first watch, his rifle across his knees, listening to the night sounds of the desert with the practiced ear of a frontiersman. Nijoni and the baby slept nearby, their breathing forming a gentle counterpoint to the distant yip of coyotes and the soft hooting of an owl. The second day brought them into rougher country, a maze of red rock canyons, where the trail sometimes narrowed to a treacherous ledge, barely wide enough for the horses. Jack led them carefully, choosing paths that offered the best combination of safety and concealment. The baby was remarkably good-natured despite the difficult journey, crying only when hungry or uncomfortable and quieting quickly under Nijoni's gentle care. By unspoken agreement, they began to share responsibility for the child, Jack holding him while Nijoni prepared food, Nijoni carrying him while Jack scouted ahead. It felt natural, this sharing of duties, as if they had been caring for the infant together for much longer than a mere 2 days. As they made camp that second evening, in a small, defensible hollow surrounded by juniper trees, Jack found himself watching Nijoni as she nursed the baby with a mixture of goat's milk and water from a soft leather pouch fashioned by the Navajo women. Her face in profile against the sunset was striking, strong features softened by the tenderness of her expression as she looked down at the child. "What will happen when we reach the Apache?" Jack asked suddenly, voicing the question that had been troubling him throughout the day. "Will they welcome him? He has no parents, no name?" Nijoni considered this, her dark eyes thoughtful. Apache ways different from Navajo in some things, same in others. Child of tribe is child of all. Someone will take him, raise him as own. She hesitated, then added softly, "Hard to give up child once heart attach. You feel this too?" "Yes." Jack looked away, unable to deny the truth of her words. In just 2 days, he had become deeply attached to the infant boy, finding himself thinking of the future, of watching the child grow, of teaching him to ride and hunt and survive in this harsh but beautiful land. But such thoughts were foolish. The baby was Apache. He belonged with his people, learning their ways, their language, their traditions. No matter how Jack felt, the right path was clear. Deliver the child safely to his tribe, then return to his solitary existence. But even as he reaffirmed this plan in his mind, Jack knew something fundamental had changed. He could never go back to the whiskey-soaked oblivion that had been his life before. The baby had awakened him, and Nijoni's quiet strength had shown him another way to live with grief, not by drowning it, but by channeling it into care for others. As if sensing his thoughts, Nijoni spoke again, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "Tomorrow we reach Apache territory. Must be very careful. They see white man first. Maybe shoot, ask questions after." Jack nodded grimly. He was well aware of the reception likely to await a white man approaching an Apache camp uninvited. "We'll fly a white flag," he said, "and keep our distance until they send someone to parley." Nijoni agreed, though her eyes remained troubled. "Sleep now," she said, passing the now sleeping baby to Jack for the first watch. "I take second watch." Jack cradled the infant against his chest, marveling at how natural it felt now, how the tiny weight seemed to anchor him to the earth in a way nothing had for years. The night was clear and cold, the stars brilliant overhead. He found himself speaking softly to the sleeping child, words he would never have uttered in daylight or to adult ears. "I don't even know your name, little one, but you've changed my life. Whatever happens tomorrow, I won't forget you. I'll keep living better for your sake." The baby stirred slightly, small fingers curling reflexively around a fold of Jack's buckskin jacket. The simple, trusting gesture nearly undid him. Jack Harmon, who had faced Confederate charges and Apache war parties without flinching, found his eyes misting over for a nameless orphan he had known less than 3 days. It was madness, and yet it felt like the first sane thing he had experienced in years. The attack came just before dawn. Jack had surrendered the watch to Nijoni 2 hours earlier and fallen into a deep, dreamless sleep. He was awakened by her urgent hand on his shoulder and the immediate awareness that the baby was no longer beside him. "Riders," Nijoni whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Coming fast. 4 men." Jack was instantly alert, reaching for his rifle as he rose to a crouch. Nijoni had already secured the baby in her carrier and was preparing to mount her horse. Jack moved to the edge of their small hollow, staying low and in the shadows of the junipers. In the pre-dawn light, he could make out 4 mounted figures approaching from the northeast, the direction of redemption. They rode hard, with purpose, following the trail with the skill of experienced trackers. Jack's blood ran cold as recognition dawned. He knew those riders. They were regulars at the Rusty Nail Saloon, Silas Cutter and his gang of ne'er-do-wells. Men who hired out for any dirty job that paid well, from debt collection to claim jumping to hunting down runaway wives. "It's them," Jack said grimly, returning to where Nijoni waited with the horses. "The men who killed the mother." Her face paled, but her voice remained steady. "How they find us?" Jack's mind raced through the possibilities. "They must have backtracked to where I found the baby. Saw the signs of my horse, maybe heard the gunshots I fired at the Coyotes. They know these parts as well as I do. Wouldn't be hard to guess I'd head for the Navajo camp." He checked his Winchester, making sure it was fully loaded. "We need to move. Now, if we can reach the Apache territory by midday, we might have a chance." Nijoni nodded, swinging gracefully onto her pinto despite the baby secured to her chest. Jack mounted Chance, wincing at the soft nickering of the animals that might betray their position. They had no choice but to ride hard and hope for enough of a head start to lose their pursuers in the maze of canyons ahead. The sun was just cresting the eastern mountains as they pushed their horses to a gallop across a stretch of open ground. Behind them, a distant shout confirmed Jack's worst fears. They had been spotted. "Ride!" he called to Nijoni, who bent low over her horse's neck, one arm protectively cradling the baby. Jack followed, occasionally glancing back to gauge the distance between them and their pursuers. The gap was closing slowly but steadily. Cutter and his men had fresh horses, and no compunctions about riding them to death. Jack's mind worked furiously, mapping the terrain ahead. There was a narrow canyon about 2 miles further that connected to a labyrinth of smaller ravines. If they could reach it, they might be able to lose the pursuers, or at least find a defensible position. "Head for the split rock," he shouted to Nijoni, pointing toward a distinctive formation on the horizon. She nodded, urging her pinto to greater speed. They reached the entrance to the canyon, with barely a quarter-mile lead on their pursuers. The path narrowed dramatically, forcing them to slow to a trot. Jack kept glancing behind, knowing that the confined space would make them easy targets once Cutter's gang reached the canyon mouth. "Keep going," he told Nijoni. "I'll hold them off." Before she could protest, Jack had dismounted. Slapping Chance on the rump to follow Nijoni's pinto, he took up position behind a large boulder at the canyon entrance, Winchester ready. He didn't have to wait long. Silas Cutter appeared first, his weathered face twisted in a predatory grin beneath his dusty hat. Jack took careful aim and fired. Not at Cutter, but at his horse, bringing the animal down and sending the rider tumbling to the ground. The other 3 riders scattered for cover as Jack fired again, forcing them to keep their distance. "I know it's you, Harmon," Cutter's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "What's got into you?" "Protecting Injun vermin. That brat belongs to the squaw we put down 2 days back, don't it?" Jack's finger tightened on the trigger at the casual admission of murder, but he held his fire, conserving ammunition. "You're on the wrong side this time, Harmon," Cutter continued. "That Apache whelp's daddy led a raid that killed 6 settlers last month. Women and children, Harmon. We're just settling accounts." Jack doubted the truth of this claim. It was too convenient, too perfect a justification for what was likely nothing more than opportunistic cruelty. But even if it were true, the baby was innocent. Jack had seen too much death, caused too much of it himself during the war and after. He would not be party to more senseless killing, especially of a child. "Go back, Silas," he shouted. "This doesn't have to end with more blood." Cutter's laugh was ugly, echoing off the canyon walls. "Oh, it's gonna end in blood all right. Yours and that Injun woman's. And then we're gonna finish what we started with that brat." A rifle shot punctuated his words, the bullet striking the rock near Jack's head, sending stone chips flying. Jack returned fire, then began working his way backward into the canyon, using the boulders for cover. He needed to rejoin Nijoni and continue their flight. The canyon walls were too high for Cutter's men to easily flank him, giving him a momentary advantage. As he retreated, Jack could hear them advancing cautiously, unwilling to rush into his line of fire. He reached Chance, who had stopped 100 yards in, and quickly mounted, spurring the Palomino deeper into the canyon. He caught up to Nijoni at a fork in the path. She had dismounted and was pressing herself against the rock wall, the baby clutched tightly to her chest. Her eyes were wide with fear, but her jaw was set in determination. "They kill mother," she said, her voice tight. "They want kill baby, too. Why?" Jack shook his head, dismounting and leading Chance to stand beside her. "They're claiming revenge for a raid, but it's just an excuse. Some men don't need reasons to do evil things." He glanced back down the canyon, judging the distance. "We need to keep moving. The right fork leads deeper into Apache territory. It's our best chance." Nijoni nodded, but as she moved to remount her pinto, a rifle shot echoed through the canyon, and the mare reared in panic, tearing the reins from Nijoni's grasp. The horse bolted, disappearing down the left fork of the canyon before either of them could stop it. "Damn it!" Jack muttered, quickly assessing their options. "We'll have to double up on Chance." He helped Nijoni mount behind him, her arms encircling his waist, the baby secure between them. Chance snorted at the extra weight, but held steady as Jack urged him forward into the right fork. The path narrowed further, forcing them to slow to a walk. Behind them, Jack could hear Cutter and his men reaching the fork, their voices echoing as they argued over which way to follow. "Split up!" Cutter's voice commanded. "Davis, you come with me down the right fork. Jenkins and Tate take the left. Find that horse." Jack grimaced. 2 against 2 was better odds than 4 against 2, but still not good, especially with Nijoni and the baby to protect. They needed to find a defensible position, and soon. The canyon twisted and turned, occasionally opening into small, sheltered valleys before narrowing again. Jack pushed Chance as fast as he dared, all the while scanning for a place to make a stand. They had been riding for perhaps 20 minutes when the canyon opened into a broader space with a small, spring-fed pool. On the far side, the walls rose steeply, with several cave-like openings visible halfway up. "There," Jack said, pointing. "We can reach those caves and hold them off from above." Nijoni nodded against his back, her arms tightening slightly around his waist. They dismounted, and Jack led Chance to the pool for a quick drink before securing him in a grassy area beneath the caves. Then, with the baby still strapped to Nijoni's chest, they began the difficult climb up the rocky slope to the nearest cave opening. They had just reached the cave when the sound of approaching horses echoed through the small valley. Jack pulled Nijoni deeper into the shadows of the cave entrance, his finger to his lips. The cave was shallow but offered good cover and a clear view of the valley below. Jack positioned himself at the edge, rifle ready, as Silas Cutter and his companion rode into the open space. They dismounted cautiously, eyes scanning the valley. "Tracks lead right up to here." "Silas," the second man, Davis, said, crouching to examine the ground. "They can't be far." Cutter nodded, his hand on his revolver as he studied the valley walls. His gaze paused on the caves, and Jack tensed, knowing they had been spotted. "Up there," Cutter said, drawing his gun. "Harmon, we know you're up there. Come on down, and maybe we'll let the woman live." Jack remained silent, his rifle trained on Cutter. Beside him, Nijoni had moved deeper into the cave, shielding the baby with her body. The standoff stretched for several long moments, then Davis made a fatal mistake. Growing impatient, he started toward the slope that led to the caves. His rifle held ready. Jack took careful aim and fired, hitting the man in the shoulder and sending him sprawling backward. Cutter immediately took cover behind a boulder, returning fire. Bullets struck the rock around the cave entrance, sending chips flying, but Jack and Nijoni were well protected by the depth of the opening. "You're outnumbered, Harmon," Cutter shouted, though they both knew it was a lie now. "Jenkins and Tate will be here any minute. Give up the brat, and you can ride away." Jack's response was another carefully aimed shot that forced Cutter deeper behind his cover. The exchange of gunfire continued sporadically, neither man able to gain an advantage. Jack was acutely aware of their limited ammunition and the likelihood that the other two members of Cutter's gang would indeed find them eventually. They needed a way out, but the only exit from the valley was the way they had come in, directly past Cutter's position. As if reading his thoughts, Nijoni touched his arm, pointing deeper into the cave. "Look," she whispered. Jack glanced back and saw what he had missed in their haste to take cover. The cave extended further back than he had thought, with a narrow passage leading deeper into the rock. "Might be another way out," he agreed. Keeping his voice low, making a quick decision, Jack fired several more shots to keep Cutter pinned down, then retreated from the cave entrance to join Nijoni. "Go," he urged her. "Follow the passage. I'll be right behind you." She hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave him, but the baby's safety had to come first. With a brief touch to Jack's arm that conveyed more than words could, she turned and disappeared into the narrow passage. The baby held close. Jack returned to the cave entrance, firing periodically to maintain the illusion of their position while also conserving ammunition. Below, Davis had dragged himself behind cover, clearly wounded, but still alive. Cutter was shouting again, his frustration evident in the increasing viciousness of his threats, but Jack tuned him out, focusing instead on counting his remaining bullets and listening for any sound of Nijoni's return. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Jack was down to his last few rifle rounds when he heard a soft sound behind him. Turning, he saw Nijoni emerging from the passage, her face alight with hope despite the dust and scratches that spoke of a difficult journey. "There is way out," she whispered urgently. "Small opening on other side of ridge. Lead to different canyon." Jack felt a surge of relief. If they could slip away unseen, they might yet complete their mission. He fired one last shot toward Cutter's position, then quickly followed Nijoni into the passage. It was a tight squeeze in places, forcing them to proceed in single file. Bent almost double, the baby, remarkably, remained quiet, perhaps sensing the need for silence. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes branching, but Nijoni led the way confidently, retracing her earlier path through the darkness. Finally, they emerged into blinding sunlight through a small opening, half hidden by scrub brush. They were on the opposite side of the ridge, overlooking a different canyon that seemed to widen as it stretched southward. "Apache territory close now," Nijoni said, pointing to the distant landscape. "Maybe half-day ride." Jack nodded, squinting against the sun. Their immediate problem was the lack of a horse. Chance was still tethered in the valley with Cutter. They would have to proceed on foot, at least until they could find the Pinto, if it hadn't run too far. The terrain was rough but not impassable, with a clear path leading down into the new canyon. "We'd better move," Jack said, checking his Colt. "Cutter will figure out we've gone soon enough." Nijoni adjusted the baby carrier, making sure the infant was secure and comfortable, then followed Jack as he began picking his way down the rocky slope. They had been walking for perhaps an hour when they heard it, the distant but unmistakable sound of hoofbeats, approaching fast. Jack pulled Nijoni behind a large boulder, his hand on his revolver. The rider appeared around a bend in the canyon, and Jack's finger tensed on the trigger, then relaxed as he recognized the Pinto mare, riderless but otherwise unharmed. "Your horse," he said with a grin that felt unfamiliar on his face. "Looks like luck's finally turning our way." The Pinto seemed equally pleased to see them, nickering softly as they approached. Jack helped Nijoni mount, then handed up the baby, who had begun to fuss, hungry after the long, stressful morning. "You ride ahead," he told her. "I'll follow on foot. If you see any sign of Cutter or his men, don't wait for me. Just get the baby to safety." Nijoni shook her head firmly. "No leave you behind. We stay together." Before Jack could argue, she extended her hand to him. "Horse strong. Carry both and baby short time." Jack hesitated, calculating the added weight and the distance they still needed to travel. The Pinto was indeed sturdy, and they could alternate riding and walking to spare the animal. With the nod, he grasped Njoni's hand and swung up behind her, his arms encircling her waist as hers had done earlier with him. The baby, secured between them, gurgled happily at the reunion. As they set off at a careful trot, Jack found himself acutely aware of Njoni's closeness, the scent of her hair, the strength in her slender frame. In the midst of danger and uncertainty, he felt a peace he hadn't known in years. They traveled through the afternoon, alternating between both riding and one walking alongside to rest the horse. The canyon gradually widened into a broad valley dotted with mesquite and cholla cactus. The sun beat down mercilessly, and their water supply dwindled alarmingly. The baby, exposed to the elements despite their best efforts to shade him, grew increasingly fretful. Just as Jack was beginning to worry they had somehow missed the Apache encampment, Njoni pointed to a thin column of smoke rising in the distance. "There," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Apache camp." Jack squinted toward the smoke, his experienced eye noting the careful placement of the camp in a defensible position near water and with good visibility of the surrounding terrain. It was still several miles away, but they should reach it before sunset if they weren't intercepted first. As if summoned by the thought, a movement on a ridge to their right caught Jack's attention. He reacted instantly, pulling Njoni and the horse into the shelter of a large boulder. "Apache scouts," he whispered, nodding toward the ridge where several mounted figures were now clearly visible. Watching them, Njoni swallowed hard, then reached into her bundle and withdrew a strip of white cloth, a makeshift flag of truce. "We show peaceful," she said, tying the cloth to a stick and raising it high. Jack nodded, though his hand remained near his revolver. The Apache scouts conferred briefly. Then two of them began descending toward the valley floor, while the others maintained their position on the ridge, rifles visible, but not yet aimed. "Let me do the talking," Njoni said, as they waited for the scouts to approach. "I speak little Apache. Enough, maybe." Jack nodded, knowing that his presence as a white man was likely to provoke immediate hostility. The two Apache warriors approached cautiously, their expressions impassive, but their eyes missing nothing. They were young men, perhaps in their 20s, dressed in a mixture of traditional garments and items clearly taken from white settlers or soldiers. One wore a cavalry officer's jacket, incongruous but practical in the cooling evening air. They stopped their horses about 20 feet away, hands on weapons but not drawing them. Njoni stepped forward, the baby visible in the carrier on her chest, and began to speak in halting Apache, occasionally supplementing with Navajo words or gestures when her vocabulary failed her. Jack watched the warriors' faces, trying to gauge their reaction. At first they remained stoic, listening without comment. Then, as Njoni presumably reached the part about finding the baby and the murdered mother, one of them dismounted and approached her, his attention fixed on the infant. He spoke rapidly to his companion, who also dismounted. Both warriors examined the baby carefully, speaking to each other in low tones. Then the first warrior, the one in the cavalry jacket, addressed Njoni directly, his tone questioning. She responded, gesturing toward Jack, clearly explaining his role in saving the child. The warrior's dark eyes shifted to Jack, studying him with an intensity that was almost physical in its force. Finally, he spoke a few words to Njoni, who turned to Jack with visible relief. "He say, baby is son of Chief Blackknife's sister," she translated. "They take us to camp. Chief, want hear story?" Jack nodded, understanding that they were being invited, or perhaps ordered, to accompany the scouts back to the Apache encampment. It was what they had sought. Yet now that the moment had arrived, Jack felt a strange reluctance. Once they reached the camp and delivered the baby to his people, their mission would be complete. Njoni would likely return to her Navajo community, and Jack would go back to his solitary ranch. The thought left an emptiness in his chest that no amount of whiskey would fill. But there was no alternative. The baby belonged with his people. With a deep breath, Jack mounted behind Nijoni on the Pinto, and they followed the Apache scouts toward the distant smoke. The Apache camp was larger than Jack had expected, with perhaps 30 wickiups arranged in a rough circle around a central fire. As they rode in, escorted by the scouts, Jack could feel dozens of eyes watching them, suspicious, hostile, curious. Women gathered children close, and men reached for weapons. The baby, sensing the tension, began to cry, his wails cutting through the silence that had fallen over the camp. They were led to the largest wickiup, where an imposing man stood waiting. Chief Blackknife was tall and straight despite his years, his face deeply lined with age and experience, his long hair showing streaks of gray. He wore a mixture of traditional Apache garments and items clearly taken from white settlers or soldiers, a cavalry officer's jacket adorned with tribal symbols, buckskin leggings, and moccasins intricately decorated with beadwork. The chief's eyes went immediately to the crying infant. Without waiting for formal introductions, he strode forward and looked intently at the baby. A flash of emotion crossed his stoic features. Recognition, perhaps even love. He spoke rapidly to one of the scouts, who translated for Jack and Nijoni. "Chief say this is sister's son. She go to gather plants 4 days ago, never return. Hunters sent to find her. Now we know why she not come back." The chief reached for the baby, and Nijoni, after a moment's hesitation, carefully transferred the infant to his arms. The child quieted almost immediately, tiny hands reaching up to touch the chief's weathered face. Blackknife spoke again, his voice softer now, addressing the baby directly in words Jack couldn't understand but whose meaning was clear. A welcome, a promise of protection, a pledge of kinship. Then the chief looked up, his penetrating gaze moving from Nijoni to Jack and back again. He spoke at length, the scout translating in shorter bursts. "Chief, thank you for saving child. Say you both have strong hearts, brave spirits. Want know whole story of how you find baby, who kill his mother." And so, with Nijoni translating where needed, they told the tale. Jack's drunken ride home, the Coyote attack, the discovery of the blood trail, their journey to the Navajo camp, and then onward to Apache territory, and finally, the pursuit by Cutter and his men. As they described the killers, Jack noticed several Apache warriors exchanging glances of recognition. When he mentioned Cutter by name, there was a ripple of reaction through the gathered crowd. The chief spoke again, his expression grim. "Cutter and his men known to us," the scout translated. "They killed 3 Apache last trading season." Asked. "Claim self-defense. Army believe them, not us." Jack nodded, unsurprised. It was an old, familiar story on the frontier. Atrocities committed against native peoples, excused or ignored by authorities who viewed them as less than human. He had seen it countless times during his scouting days, had even been complicit in it through his silence. That complicity was one of the many burdens he had tried to drown in whiskey over the years. Now, looking at the orphaned baby in the chief's arms, Jack felt a renewed sense of shame for the times he had looked away from such injustices. As if sensing his thoughts, Nijoni placed a gentle hand on his arm. Her touch grounding him in the present moment, the chief spoke again, this time directly to Jack, his English broken but understandable. "You save Apache child, you enemy of our enemies. Tonight, you guest in our camp." With those words, the tension in the air dissipated somewhat. Women approached to take the baby. Cooing and fussing over him, Jack noticed that the infant was passed not to one specific woman, but to several, each examining him carefully before handing him to the next. The chief, seeing Jack's confusion, explained through the scout. "They see which woman has milk for baby. Sister's son need new mother now." It was a practical solution, typically direct in the Apache way. Jack nodded his understanding, watching as the baby was finally settled with a young woman whose own infant had died just days before. The look of joy on her face as she held the orphaned child to her breast was unmistakable. A second chance at motherhood, a healing for her own loss. Jack glanced at Nijoni and saw in her eyes that she understood this complex emotion intimately. They were given food, a rich stew of rabbit and wild plants, and places near the central fire. Despite their status as guests, Jack noted that they were subtly but constantly watched, particularly him. Trust came slowly between whites and Apaches, if it came at all. As night fell, the camp settled into its routine. The baby, now fed and content, was brought back to the chief's wickiup, where he would apparently sleep under Black Knife's personal protection. Jack and Nijoni were shown to a small wickiup at the edge of the camp, a single shelter for both of them, a presumption of their relationship that neither bothered to correct. They sat side by side at the entrance, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The day's tension and exertion were catching up to them both, but sleep seemed distant. "What will you do now?" Nijoni asked softly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Go back to ranch, back to whiskey." There was no judgment in her voice, only genuine curiosity and perhaps a hint of concern. Jack considered the question, realizing he hadn't thought beyond delivering the baby safely. The idea of returning to his solitary existence, to the numbing embrace of alcohol, held no appeal. These few days of clarity of purpose had shown him how empty his life had become. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "Can't go back to how things were, but don't rightly know how to go forward either." He looked at her profile in the starlight, struck by how beautiful she was and how strong. "What about you? Will you return to your people?" Nijoni's eyes remained on the stars as she answered. "Navajo camp not home anymore, not since husband and baby die, just place I live." She turned to face him, her expression open and vulnerable in a way it hadn't been before. "These days, caring for baby, traveling with you, first time I feel alive again, first time heart not heavy with every breath." Jack understood completely. The baby had awakened something in both of them, a capacity for care, for connection, for life beyond grief. And somewhere along their dangerous journey, they had begun to heal each other as well, two broken souls, finding unexpected comfort in shared understanding. He reached out hesitantly, his rough hand covering her smaller one. She turned her palm upward, interlacing their fingers in silent acknowledgement of whatever was growing between them. They might have spoken further, might have begun to shape tentative plans for a future neither had imagined possible days before. But a commotion at the edge of the camp interrupted the moment. Shouts, the pounding of hooves, the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Jack was on his feet instantly, Colt drawn. Nijoni beside him. Apache warriors streamed toward the disturbance, weapons ready. "Cutter," Jack said grimly, moving to join the defenders. But Nijoni caught his arm, pointing toward the chief's wickiup, where the baby was sleeping. "Baby," she said simply. Jack nodded, understanding her concern. If Cutter had somehow tracked them to the Apache camp, the baby would be his primary target, the final loose end in his murderous mission. Together, they raced across the camp toward the chief's dwelling, even as the sounds of battle intensified at the perimeter. They reached the wickiup just as two figures emerged from the shadows behind it. Jenkins and Tate, the missing members of Cutter's gang, moving with the stealth of experienced raiders. Jack's revolver barked twice, dropping Tate where he stood. Jenkins returned fire, forcing Jack and Nijoni to dive for cover behind a stack of firewood. The commotion awakened the baby, his cries audible from within the wickiup. Chief Blackknife appeared at the entrance, rifle in hand, the infant now secured in a carrier on his back. Jenkins, seeing his target, fired wildly, missing the chief, but tearing through the wickiup covering. Jack rolled to a better position and fired again, hitting Jenkins in the leg. The wounded man stumbled but kept moving, determined to complete his grisly mission. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Jenkins, knowing he was cornered, made a desperate lunge toward the chief and the baby, knife drawn for close combat. Jack fired again, but his chamber was empty. He had expended his last bullet. Nijoni, unarmed but fearless, threw herself into Jenkins' path, taking the full force of his charge. They went down together in a tangle of limbs, the knife flashing in the firelight. Jack was moving instantly, crossing the distance in 2 strides, his empty revolver becoming a club, as he brought it down on Jenkins' skull with all the force he could muster. The man collapsed, unconscious or dead. Jack didn't pause to check which. His entire focus was on Nijoni, who lay motionless on the ground, a dark stain spreading across the front of her dress. "No," Jack breathed, gathering her into his arms. "No, no, no." Her eyes fluttered open, finding his face in the chaotic darkness. Around them, the sounds of fighting continued, Cutter's desperate last stand at the edge of the camp, but it seemed distant, unimportant. All that mattered was the woman in his arms and the life seeping out of her with each labored breath. Chief Black Knife knelt beside them, the baby still secured to his back. Now quieter, as if sensing the gravity of the moment, the chief called out, and almost immediately an older woman hurried to them, her hands moving expertly over Nijoni's wound, her face grave as she spoke rapid Apache to Black Knife. Jack didn't need a translation to understand the prognosis. The knife had struck deep, likely piercing vital organs. Nijoni's time was measured in minutes, not hours. "Jack," she whispered, her voice surprisingly strong despite her fading pulse. "Baby safe now. You safe." He nodded, unable to speak, past the knot in his throat. Her hand found his, squeezing with the last of her strength. "You live now. No more whiskey. No more hiding from life." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Promise me." Jack nodded again, tears tracking unashamedly down his weathered cheeks. "I promise," he managed, his voice breaking on the words. Nijoni's gaze shifted to the baby, secure in the chief's care. "Tell him," she said, her voice growing fainter. "Tell him when he old enough, about his mother, about how you save him, about me." Her eyes returned to Jack's face, memorizing it in her final moments. "I find you again. Next life. Look for me in sunrise." With those words, Nijoni's eyes closed for the final time, her hand going limp in Jack's grasp. He held her close, rocking gently, oblivious to the battle that was now ending around them. Cutter and his remaining men had been killed or captured. Jack would later learn that Cutter himself had died trying to escape, shot from his horse by Apache marksmen. None of it mattered in that moment. All that existed was the weight of Nijoni in his arms and the crushing knowledge that he had found and lost his chance at happiness in the span of 3 short days. The chief's hand on his shoulder eventually drew Jack back to the present. Black Knife's face was solemn but compassionate as he spoke. The scout translating softly, "She die as warrior, protecting child, will be honored in Apache ways. You stay for ceremony." Jack nodded, unable to imagine leaving before paying proper respect to Nijoni's sacrifice. The chief spoke again, this time gesturing to the baby, who was now awake and watching Jack with solemn dark eyes. "Child have no name yet. Apache custom father choose name." The chief paused, then continued, his words careful and deliberate. "You save child from coyotes. You bring him home. You fight for him. In Apache eyes, you have father's right." Jack looked up in surprise, meeting the chief's steady gaze. He was being offered an honor unprecedented for a white man. The right to name an Apache child, to forge a connection that would last beyond his time in the camp. It was a recognition of the bond that had formed in their brief but intense journey, and perhaps also an acknowledgement of Nijoni's obvious feelings for him. With reverent care, Jack laid Nijoni's body on the ground, arranging her hands peacefully across her chest. Then he rose and approached the chief, who carefully transferred the baby into Jack's arms. The infant looked up at him, tiny fingers reaching for his beard, completely trusting. In that moment, Jack knew what the name should be. He spoke slowly, ensuring the scout could translate accurately. "In my language, we have a name that means gift from God, Samuel. And in honor of the woman who gave her life for him, I would add her name in the Navajo way, Samuel Nijoni. The chief nodded, repeating the name in his own accent, making it official in the eyes of the tribe. Jack held the newly named Samuel close, whispering a promise that only the baby could hear. I'll come back for you, son. When you're old enough to understand, I'll tell you everything, just like she wanted. The following dawn found Jack standing on a high bluff overlooking the Apache camp. Nijoni's body prepared for burial, according to a mixture of Apache and Navajo traditions. Chief Blackknife had explained that she would be laid to rest, facing east, so that the rising sun would greet her spirit each morning on its journey to the next world. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, the Apache women began their morning songs, haunting melodies that seemed to carry Nijoni's spirit upward with each note. Jack stood silent, Samuel in his arms, watching as the woman who had changed both their lives was returned to the earth. The baby was quiet, as if understanding the solemnity of the moment, his dark eyes fixed on the brilliant colors of the sunrise. When the ceremony was complete, Jack approached Chief Blackknife. Through the scout, they spoke of practical matters. Jack would return to his ranch, put his affairs in order, and then come back to visit Samuel regularly as he grew. The chief agreed to this arrangement, recognizing the unique bond between the white man and the Apache child. There was no precedent for such a situation, but Blackknife was wise enough to see that traditional boundaries sometimes needed to be redrawn for the greater good. As Jack prepared to depart, the chief presented him with two gifts: a finely crafted Apache knife to replace the revolver that had been damaged beyond repair, and a small pouch containing a lock of Nijoni's hair wrapped in a strip of the Navajo blanket that had first protected Samuel from the Coyotes. With these treasures secured and Samuel entrusted to his new Apache mother, Jack mounted Chance for the long ride home. As he reached the edge of the camp, he turned for one last look. The morning sun illuminated the scene. Women going about their daily tasks, warriors tending to horses, children playing in the dust. And in the center, Chief Blackknife stood holding Samuel, the baby's small hand raised as if in farewell. Jack raised his own hand in response, then turned his horse northward. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, he faced the future with clarity and purpose rather than despair. Nijoni had been right. The hole in his heart would never close completely. But it had been filled with something new, something that gave his life meaning beyond mere survival. As he rode, Jack realized that the craving for whiskey that had been his constant companion for years was noticeably absent. In its place was a determination to honor his promise to Nijoni, to live fully, to return for Samuel, to be worthy of the sacrifice she had made. The morning sun warmed his back, and he remembered her final words, "Look for me in sunrise." Jack glanced eastward at the brilliant light spilling across the landscape, transforming the harsh desert into a place of unexpected beauty. Perhaps she was there, in that golden light. Perhaps she always would be. The thought brought a smile to his weathered face as he rode onward, leaving one chapter of his life behind and moving toward another, one that held the promise of redemption, connection, and perhaps in time a different kind of love. For now it was enough to know that a drunken cowboy who had saved a native baby from coyotes had in turn been saved himself.